Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and let me start with a bit of an apology with how crazy last week was with leaving our apartment to escape the smoke, and we stayed 2 nights at a family member's house before going down and staying in a hotel for 3 nights, and it was just a bit of a wild week compared to our normal routine here. I meant to start my week-long carry challenge with the Benchmade Tengu, and then it just got away from me. So I got this knife from Rivers Edge Cutlery over a week ago now, I think. I'm filming this on Monday. Yeah, I don't remember exactly which day I opened this up, but I think it was about a week ago. And I meant to start a week-long carry challenge with the knife that day. If I'm being totally honest, I've only carried this knife for one whole day so far, and then part of another day. But I just, in the scramble of everything going nuts and some other things I got in, it just wasn't getting thrown into my pocket. And part of that is the reason why I'm doing the carry challenge. I'm just not used to carrying clipless knives yet. And so this is going to be my actual starting point of the week-long carry challenge. I will make a point for the next entire week. And I'm going to be away from home for a couple of days this week, staying in a hotel again. But even with that, I'm going to make sure that every day this goes in my pocket. So let's talk first impressions so far, and yeah, just kind of provide a starting point for this. So first of all, I got this knife from Rivers Edge Cutlery. I really appreciate the dudes over there. They are just the best. I rave about them constantly for a reason. I really, really appreciate the guys over there. And as usual, getting this from them was super smooth, fast, and everything positive I can say about a knife transaction, I can say about this. This model in particular from Benchmade is one that came out relatively recently, within the last couple of months. And it's one that I have I've been drawn to a certain degree. I'm not usually that drawn to kind of traditional pattern knives. Every now and then I am. Some of them certainly more than others. But I'm especially, usually if I'm drawn at all to a traditional pattern knife, as soon as it's like a slip joint or a backlock and doesn't have a clip and all that kind of stuff, kind of out. It's not really my style or what I find myself preferring in knives. Although, to be fair, I haven't really given traditional knives or slip joints or clipless knives a fair shot. I just always write them off. And so this knife just kind of kept jumping out to me over time. And I figured it would finally be kind of a fun experiment to do for myself. Just like I've done with several pieces of gear in the past. I did it first with the Sebenza, I've done it with the pry bar, I've done it with Hanks, I've done it with the EDC fixed blade just recently with the Bradford Guardian. I like to do these challenges where I try a piece of gear that's not normal for me, that's outside of the scope of what I would typically buy or use or carry, and just see if it wins me over, if I end up liking it. And sometimes I find I do. Sometimes I find I don't. I'm in it for the journey, these types of things. So this knife I figured is kind of a great place to start for me personally with clipless knives. I think this has a really good chance of being one that I find myself liking, because if I was jumping in like straight into the deep end with a slip joint that was like real traditional, I think I'd have a harder time getting on board with it and finding that I love it and want to continue on after the challenge is done with carrying it. But this being a flipper, liner lock on bearings, cool Tanto profile, like it's a cool knife. If this knife had a clip, I would have gotten it a lot sooner, and just like it wouldn't be a carry challenge. It would just be a regular knife review at that point. But this is a knife that I like. It just is missing a component, in my opinion. So, yeah, I'm excited to see how it goes. Spending some real time with this in pocket, seeing if I find myself loathing that it doesn't have a clip, or if it wins me over and I just find like, hey, carrying a knife without a clip is actually doable for me. I actually like it. I actually find that it's fine. We shall see. But let's talk about this knife and its configuration, what it's made of, and all of that. And then yeah, we'll go from there. So first things first, we have a Tanto blade in CPM 20CV. I really, really like 20CV. It is absolutely a top tier steel. I think on this knife it makes a lot of sense. It's a great, well-rounded EDC steel, and Benchmade has been using it more and more over the past little while. I like that it's included on this knife. In terms of the grind on the blade, you'll see we've got a flat up here. It is a very thick blade stock. That's one of the things that surprised me about this knife. I didn't even, frankly, read the spec sheet on it. But yeah, it's much thicker than I was expecting. This is a stout blade, especially because it's not very tall. You can kind of feel, it just feels a little bit like stubby. It's kind of a chisel, especially with this blade on it, and it's got kind of a chisel vibe. But yeah, so you can see it's just a flat grind for this primary bevel. It extends all the way up to the tip, and then the edge on this Tanto gets very tall to kind of battle that thickness. So I'm not sure what degree bevel that is, but you can see, hopefully the light is showing that well, this edge bevel gets real thick there, whereas on the primary edge where it's ground thin down to the bottom, or thinner, I should say, it's a much skinnier edge, and that's just because of the thickness of the material. I believe it's probably the same degree bevel down here as it is up here. Anyways, we do have this interesting little baby swedge right up here leading toward the tip. I think that looks good, and it probably will allow this to pierce a little more effectively. And yeah, that's the blade itself. It is flipper deployment, so that's kind of connected to the blade. We can talk about that there at the same time, I guess. You can see it creates a little bit of a guard down here when you are grabbing the handle of the knife, so prevent you from slipping forward. That can be a good thing, although the angle we'll talk about a little bit. I feel like it's a little far back here, and it's kind of pointed toward your hand. Anyway, the handles themselves are G10. We have a black layer on top of white G10. You can see the white showing through here for this little crest. I think Jared Ogier does that on all of his knives. I'm not positive, but I would assume so. It's just kind of a shield insignia. And then the Backspacer is stacked G10 as well, so it's black and white layers of G10 that I think looks pretty cool. I feel like I've seen a guy I follow on Instagram dyed the G10 pure black, so all of it's black, dyed the white portions black, I guess, and that looks really cool to me. I'm tempted to do something like that. I like the white and black contrast. I don't mind it at all. In fact, I feel like it looks pretty cool, but it looks really cool in all black as well. So we'll see. Time will tell whether this knife is like a long-term keeper and I end up loving carrying it. Maybe that'll make me love it more, or we'll see. But yeah, I like the G10 work on it. The black and white contrasts well, and it has a cool vibe to it. Internally, we do have a liner lock, so it's full liners, top and bottom, or show scale and lock scale. And yeah, the lockup is pretty legit. It's kind of what I would consider late for a lot of knives these days, although that's a thing that I think should maybe be discussed more. A lot of people like praise early lockup, and I think a lot of times people are getting so caught up in that knives are actually locking up a lot earlier than they arguably should some of the time, and people are like, oh yes, it's an early lockup. This is just engaging very well with the lock interface, so I don't mind how far over that is. It's not over traveling, certainly, and it should be totally fine. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. My wife does this thing where when she answers a call, she puts it on speakerphone, and then she thinks that in order for the person on the other end of the call to hear her, she has to yell as loudly as she can. So I don't know if you guys could hear that coming through on your end, but it's very distracting for me. Welcome to marriage. Anyway, I was talking about the lockup. So I like the lockup on here. It's certainly what I would see some people consider as a little late. But yeah, it's not over traveling. I think it's a good solid lockup for a knife like this. I don't know why that struggled so hard to focus. Anyway, it's a good solid liner lock design. The detent that's in there functions quite well. It's a nice crisp deployment, not too crisp, not too soft, or not too hard, not too soft, I should say. It's just a clean break. I like that quite a bit. And yeah, let's talk about Ergos, and then we'll talk about carry so far. Like I said, I've had it in pocket about a day. I guess a little over a day, because a day and then part of another day. But anyway, the Ergos on this knife are pretty good for me. As you can see, this handle profile is just stupid neutral. I mean, it couldn't be much more neutral than this. All the edges are rounded well. Everything is very smooth. And so I get full 4 fingers just barely on here. It's close. And I feel like what's interesting about the Ergos is only the flipper tab. That's where things get a little funky, because I'm able to just barely get full 4-finger grip on here. Hammer grip or saber grip. It feels good. Everything's neutral, smooth. It's great. But the angle of this flipper tab, I don't know. I just feel like if they could bump it up to here instead of here, it would improve the Ergos, and I think it would look better. I don't know design-wise why that was necessary. I feel like if they bumped it up, I get that it's kind of coming right to the lock interface, but if they made the lock bar just a little bit longer, come up further, then I feel like it would still work the same. So I don't know if that's a geometry thing or what. I will say, using it as a flipper tab, it works great. I like that it's not jimped. It's not overly sharp or anything. It's a relatively smooth little tab there. So it's not like bothersome having my finger up against it or anything. It's not creating any issues for me per se, but I feel like I could use those extra few millimeters of space there. It would be a welcome thing. And so it's interesting that the flipper tab is kind of migrated this way. Maybe I'm being nitpicky about it, but that's just my honest take on it so far. But overall, Ergos are nice. Knife is smooth. There's no clip, which actually in hand feels very good. That can't create a hot spot if it's not there. There's no jimping anywhere, so everything is nice and smooth. It feels good in hand. It doesn't feel like the most locked in knife ever. It's a smooth, very neutral handle, but I grip down on it in a way that doesn't feel loosey-goosey in my hand either. I don't feel like this knife is gonna slip out for any reason, and it's kind of a smaller, like, gentlemanly knife anyways, so I don't see people getting this one and expecting it to be a tactical knife or a hard use folder. I mean, the materials and the build, you could probably use this harder than a lot of kind of traditional pattern knives. There's an argument to be made there, but it's just not the type of knife that I'd ever reach for like hard use task. So I think that's good. The Ergos are dialed well. I would just make that, if I could wave a magic wand and change a little thing about the Ergos, it would just be that tab. But it's not going to ruin the knife for hardly anyone, I don't think. If you had bigger hands than mine, it would probably bother you more than me, because then your hand shuffles a little bit this way, and then your pinky's not fitting on the knife because they've got that tab there. But I feel like I'm probably saying too much about that, because it's really not that big of a deal. Let's talk about, I've already talked about action. I like the deployment. Closing the knife is also, once I get past that ramp, fairly smooth. It's not drop shutty, but it's a skinny little blade. I doubt that, I don't see a knife in this like size and profile getting very drop shutty very easily. I'm sure there are some, certainly, that are stupid drop shutty and are this thin of a blade, but I don't know. It is thick this way. We'll talk about that, but it's thin profile this way. So I feel like the amount of drop I'm getting from it is pretty good considering its size and build. It is running on bearings, and they function well. It's smooth. The detent is crisp, like I said. Action, I would say, is good. Not amazing, but it's good. Now, let's talk about the blade grind. I've only done a little bit of cutting with this so far, but one of the first things I noticed about it out of the box was just how, frankly, thick behind the edge it is. Obviously, especially up toward the tip, as evidenced by that grind. You can tell it's super thick up here. But even where it's thinnest, it still just feels really thick behind the edge to me. And I get it sometimes, the argument on like tactical knives, fighting knives, hard to use outdoor knives, like there's a perceived like build-in of strength, and I'm not an expert on that, but I think oftentimes for like actual edge retention, a thin geometry can actually be better. But I see why some knives are built thick and robust, and it's going to go through stuff forever. But this knife, I don't get that vibe from a little traditional knife like this. Modern traditional, if you will. I feel like most traditional knives that I've ever handled or experienced have typically been pretty thin blade stock. And that translates to a better cutting geometry to go through, in my opinion, the types of things that I foresee myself wanting to cut most with a knife like this. Opening boxes, going through zip ties, my typical, in almost all my videos, I rattle off the same kind of list of like regular EDC type of stuff. Processing some cardboard here and there, cutting tags off of shirts, opening packaging for my daughter, like that kind of stuff. This could be so much thinner, and it would be absolutely as strong as it would ever need to be. So I feel like the thickness of this blade stock, if I were to be honest about how I see that they got here, was more of an aesthetic choice and a feel choice than it was a performance choice. And some people will probably love that, because this thick blade aesthetically does feel pretty cool. And when you look at the knife closed, it's migrated a little off center with how much I've been playing with it, but when you look at it closed, it nests in there nicely, and it looks like a nice thick slab of good metal. And like, I get that. There's an allure to a thick blade, and it feels nice on my thumb with the thick spine up here. Like there are advantages to it aesthetically and feeling wise, but it's just not going to be as good of a cutter going through cardboard, which a ton of people cut with this knife, as it would be if they had chosen a blade stock half as thick. It could literally be half as thick as this, and I feel like I would be praising that they picked such a nice thin slicey blade stock, and then this would be a really good slicer. But so far, the little bit of cutting I've done with it, it's not that great a slicer. It's got a very good edge on it, I'll give it that, and so because it's got a great edge, of course it's going to cut. But I don't know. I feel like that's looking at this knife not based on the carry challenge, just looking at this knife as a blade that cuts things. That's the thing that has me most confused about the Tengu, because it just feels so out of whack with where I see this knife fitting. And maybe I'm wrong about traditional knives and where they fit in their philosophy of use and all that, because I'm not the expert on them. I don't have a lot of them. In fact, I don't really have any of them. But I don't know. Based on what I can perceive, it's weird to me that it's so thick. And then, with it being so thick, that they didn't choose to do a full flat grind so that it could be at least a little thinner, or that they didn't do a hollow grind because then it could get thinner again. It's a flat grind that's leaves a big flat at the top. Not huge, but when you consider how like skinny this blade is overall to begin with, I mean, it's confusing to me. I want to reiterate, it has a good edge on it. It cuts things. It's not the worst cutter I've ever experienced, not even close. It's just perplexing to me based on the rest of the build of this knife to have such a thick, robust blade. Like, I don't know, maybe you're supposed to be stabbing into car doors with this. Then it makes a little more sense, maybe? I don't know. Let's talk about the slip for a second and how I've been carrying this and how I plan to carry it. The day that I carried it for an entire day, I was wearing a pair of shorts that actually had a good like fifth pocket on it. And this was great in that fifth pocket. It was very comfortable and didn't bother me at all day. I carried it without the leather slip in that pocket so that I could just reach in, pull it out, and use it for stuff. And that was fine. It worked great. The other day that I carried it for part of a day and then stopped was because I had it in this. Now, this is a well-made little leather slip. It does feel nice. I don't have any issues with this leather slip. My issue with it isn't itself. It's kind of I don't see how I can use this and find that it's better than just having the knife loose in a pocket. Other than maybe protecting the knife itself from other things that might be in my pocket. But, like, here's my problem. I'm putting it in like so. And so imagine I have this knife in any of my pockets. Let's, for the sake of argument, say I've got it in my front right pocket, and I'm carrying this knife as a primary for some reason. Maybe I'm in slacks and I'm at a fancy occasion, and this would be a gentlemanly knife to have on me. And so to make it even nicer, I've got it in the leather slip, and I go to get this knife out to use it for something. I pull this whole leather thing out of my pocket because I can't reach into my pocket and reliably get this out of the leather while within my pocket. I have to pull the whole thing out, and then I have to use my second hand to kind of like milk it forward is the best way I've found. Just kind of pinch it till it starts coming out, and then I pull it out, and then I twist it in my hand, and then I deploy it. Like, it's too many steps. There's a reason why it's the standard for knives in the year 2020 when I'm filming this, to have your knife clipped to your pocket. So you pull it out, you deploy it, you're ready to go. This just, I did a video in a group chat that I'm in. Somebody asked what I was carrying, and I showed them the primary knife I had on me, and then I had this in the leather slip on me that day. And I pulled it out, and trying to film with one hand, I tried to get this knife out where I could use it with one hand, and in the leather slip, it's just a remarkable bummer to have to do. I don't see the allure. I have seen some people that get a leather slip that has a clip on it, and then they clip the leather slip into their pocket like this, and then they're able to pull the knife from the leather slip like as if it's a knife that's clipped in their pocket. I get that. I think that's a decent solution to making a clipless knife function like it has a clip on it. Where I don't see the merit in that is that there are tons of knives that I love that just have clips built into them. So I don't even necessarily want to try that. I feel like some people are going to come in the comments and be like, you got to try one of these clip slip things that clips into your pocket and it solves the problem. The problem has already been solved by creating knives that have clips on them. I want to see how it does for me to use a knife with no clip on it. If I'm using a sheath with a clip for a knife that has no clip, then if I'm using a sheath for a knife to carry, I'd rather EDC a fixed blade. I just found out I actually kind of like doing that. So I don't know, it's just this weird thing for me. I don't personally, no judgment to people who like doing that. And if you get a certain sense of satisfaction out of a traditional style knife and then making it kind of modern by having a clip-in sheath thing, more power to you. Once I cross that line, then I've proven my point to myself that I like knives that have pocket clips. And obviously I like knives that have pocket clips, but it proves to me that it's a requirement to have a pocket clip for me to enjoy a knife. So I want to see how this does, just the way it comes. That's important to me. I will probably carry it a couple more times in this thing. The criteria for that will be if I'm wearing shorts or pants that don't have a fifth pocket that this fits into, because it's a little bit long for some of the like coin or fifth or watch pockets, whatever you call them, that are on some of my knives. So in the case that I don't have a fifth pocket that accepts this knife, it will go into one of my pockets as a secondary or a third knife on me in this. And it'll just be loose in that pocket, probably by itself, not sharing with anything else, and we'll see how I do with it. Based on my experience so far, I don't really like that. But maybe I find that I get used to it, and I'm open to that happening, and I welcome it if it does happen. So that's kind of where I'm at so far. Yeah, my hesitancies about the knife, carrying it in this thing. When it's in a fifth pocket, it's doable. But when it's in this thing, so far I'm not sold. And then the flipper tab positioning is a little bit like less than ideal, but I don't necessarily hold that against the knife. And then the thickness of the blade is the other thing that specific to the Tengu. That's outside of the carry challenge. We'll see if I can get behind accepting how thick this blade stock is and how thick it's ground behind the edge, because that's weird to me. But maybe I find that I learn to love it. again, open to it. So I guess that'll be that. That's kind of my first impressions / the kickoff to my having this in pocket for a full week challenge uninterrupted. I'm going to make sure every day for 7 days that this is in my pocket. And then I make a point to pull it out at some point and use it for something. I don't just throw it in my pocket and forget it's there all day and then take it out at the end of the day, because that doesn't really do much for me. I could carry a lot of things this size and weight that are useless, but I also want to see how the knife does and how I relate to it, how I tangibly feel about it by the end. So I guess that'll be that. This is the Benchmade Tengu. These are my first impressions and the start to that carry challenge. So I look forward to seeing where I end up at the end of this. Hopefully you guys are intrigued as well. Let me know down below in the comments if you're somebody who carries a traditional knife a lot, and if you feel a reason to do so, whether it's just preference of you like them and think they're cool, or it's something you're used to because you've been doing it for your whole life, or whether you've gotten into them like recently and found a reason that they click for you. I'm curious about how people relate to traditional knives. Obviously this is not a true traditional knife, being on bearings and being a flipper and 20 CV and all of this, but it's a traditional pattern, so we're calling it traditional for science. Anyways, thanks guys, I appreciate it, and I'll see you on the next one.